No one believed me when I said the walls were breathing. At first, I didn't believe it myself. I thought it was just my overactive imagination, or the kind of weirdness that comes from moving back into the house where I grew up. A place always feels different when you leave it and come back, like it's been waiting for you, changing in your absence. My name is Adam, and if you'd asked me a year ago, I'd have said my biggest mistake was dropping out of college. But now I think my real mistake was coming back here, to the house my parents left me. A creaky old two-story in the middle of nowhere, with peeling wallpaper and the kind of silence that presses on your ears. It's the kind of place people describe as quaint, but at night it feels more like a tomb. The whispers started 2 days after I moved in, faint, almost like static, coming through the vents. I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a bird that got trapped somewhere. But then I noticed something strange. The whispers seemed to follow me. Wherever I went, they were just barely audible, like someone trying not to be overheard. One night I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling when I felt it. A draft that wasn't cold, but damp, brushing over my face like a breath. It was faint, almost like it didn't want to be noticed. My pulse quickened as I sat up, listening, and then I heard it, a voice low and raspy, coming from the wall behind my bed. I didn't sleep that night, not because I was scared, but because I was afraid of what might happen if I closed my eyes. What if it got closer? What if it came through? I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Houses settle, pipes rattle, and old wood creaks. That's what I told myself the next morning. But the thought wouldn't let go. That voice, it wasn't just a sound. It was deliberate, like someone waiting to be heard. I spent the day avoiding the bedroom. I busied myself cleaning, unpacking boxes, pretending everything was normal. But the whispers didn't stop. Every time I paused, I'd hear them, not just in the vents, but behind the walls, under the floors, even in the empty spaces between shelves. They were faint, almost like breathing, but if I focused too hard, I swore I could pick out words. By late afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went into the basement. The stairs groaned under my weight, and the air down there was heavier, damp, like it had been sealed away for years. Dust danced in the beam of light as I scanned the walls, looking for cracks or holes, something that might explain the sounds. I didn't find holes, but I found scratches, deep, uneven marks carved into the wood paneling near the corner. My stomach dropped as I ran my fingers over them. They weren't old. The wood felt raw, fresh. That's when I heard it again, right behind me this time. A breath, slow and deliberate, so close it raised the hairs on the back of my neck. I spun around, flashlight trembling, but there was nothing there. Nothing, except the faint echo of a voice whispering my name. By the third night, I stopped pretending it wasn't real. The whispers didn't fade, they grew bolder, louder. They didn't wait until the house was dark and quiet anymore. I heard them in the daylight, while brushing my teeth or standing at the sink washing dishes. I started to recognize patterns in them, like someone murmuring in circles, repeating phrases just out of reach. But it wasn't until I found the crawl space that I understood how bad things really were. I'd been pacing the basement again, drawn to the scratches on the wall. The air felt heavier that night, as though the room itself was breathing. That's when I noticed the edge of the paneling didn't line up properly. My fingers slid into the gap, and with a sharp pull, The wood came loose. Behind it was a dark, narrow passage. A crawl space. I should have left it alone. I should have sealed it back up and walked away, but instead I grabbed my flashlight and crouched down to see inside. The air hit me first wet and sour, like rotting leaves and mildew. My breath caught as I shined the light across the dirt floor. Something was there. Cloth, dark stains, pieces of fabric half buried in the soil. I froze, my chest tightening as the beam of light trembled in my hand. And then I saw the marks, scratches just like the ones outside, gouged deep into the wood beams inside the crawl space. I scrambled back, but before I could stand, I heard it. A whisper right by my ear. "Stay." I whipped around, but the opening was empty. My flashlight flickered, and for just a second, I thought I saw something move, a shadow shifting deeper into the space. The whispers didn't stop. They filled the basement, circling me, rising and falling like waves, until I couldn't breathe. I ran. I don't even remember getting back upstairs, but when I slammed the basement door shut and locked it, the whispers didn't stay below. They were in the walls. The whispers didn't let me sleep. They crept through the vents and under the floorboards, sometimes soft, sometimes sharp, like 1,000 voices pressing against my ears. By the fourth night, I gave up on trying to block them out. Instead, I went back to the basement. I don't know what I thought I'd find. Answers? Proof? Maybe I just needed to see it again, to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. I took a crowbar this time, gripping it so tight my knuckles went white. The crawl space was waiting. The panel I'd ripped away was still on the floor, and the opening gaped like a wound in the wall. I crouched down, flashlight trembling, and shined it inside. That's when I saw the hand. It wasn't rotted like I expected. It was pale, grayish, but the fingers twitched when the light hit them. I stumbled back, heart pounding, but the thing kept moving. It dragged itself forward more, like a shape than a person pulling inch by inch until its face came into view. No eyes, just empty sockets, black as the space behind it. Its mouth stretched open, wider than it should have been, and the whispers poured out. I screamed. I don't even know if it was out loud or just in my head, but the thing lunged, and I swung the crowbar. The metal hit something solid, but it didn't stop. It grabbed my ankle, cold, wet, like fingers made of mud. I kicked, crawled backward, and slammed the panel shut just as it reached the opening. The whispers didn't stop. They didn't even slow. I didn't go back down to the basement. I couldn't. I dragged the heaviest furniture I could find and shoved it in front of the door. It didn't make a difference. The whispers didn't care about doors. They kept coming through the walls, the floors, the vents. At night I heard scratching. Sometimes it was faint. Other times it sounded like nails raking against wood, desperate and wild. I stopped sleeping altogether. My body ached, my head throbbed, and my thoughts unraveled. I called a contractor to seal the crawl space, but he never showed up. His phone went straight to voicemail the next day. By the time the police came, I couldn't explain what had happened. I told them about the noises, the voices, the thing in the walls, but they looked at me like I was already gone, like I was something broken they didn't want to touch. They never found anything in the crawl space, not the hand, not the cloth, not even the scratches, but I still hear it. Even now, in this motel room, miles away from that house, when the lights are out and the room is quiet, The whispers are still there, and they know my name. The mirror never reflected me the same way twice. The first time I saw it, I was halfway through cleaning out my grandmother's basement. She'd passed away a month earlier, leaving me the house. It was old, like the kind of old that smells faintly of mothballs and dust, no matter how much you scrub. I found the mirror tucked behind a stack of boxes. It was huge, almost as tall as me, with an ornate gold frame covered in carvings of roses and thorns. The glass was grimy, streaked with age, but even then, something about it felt off. I wiped it down with the edge of my sleeve, and that's when I saw it, my reflection, staring back, but not quite right. The face in the mirror was mine, but the eyes were darker, sunken, like I hadn't slept in weeks. I laughed it off, blaming the bad lighting and the dust, but as I turned away, I swear the reflection didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me as I walked past. I told myself I was imagining things. Grief does weird stuff to your head, right? That's what I thought. But later that night, I dreamed I was standing in front of it. And this time my reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. I avoided the basement after that. For a few days I convinced myself the mirror was just a mirror, a creepy, old, poorly lit mirror. But the image stayed with me. Those dark eyes, the way it smiled when I didn't. Then the dreams started. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding with flashes of glass and shadows lingering in my mind. In one dream, I was trapped inside the mirror, pounding on the glass while my reflection stared back. In another, my reflection walked out while I stayed frozen behind it. I told myself it was just stress, but every time I passed the basement door, I felt it. The pull, like the mirror wanted me to come back. I finally caved. It was late past midnight when I went back down. The air felt heavier, colder. I told myself I'd just look at it one more time, prove to myself it was nothing. But as I stepped closer, my reflection looked wrong. Its head tilted slightly, like it was studying me, and then it moved. Not like a reflection, but like a person. It raised a hand and pressed it against the glass. My breath caught as it mouthed a single word, "Stay." I ran, slamming the basement door behind me, but as I turned the lock, I heard it, a faint tapping. Coming from the mirror, the tapping didn't stop. I stayed awake that night, sitting at the kitchen table with every light in the house on. My eyes kept drifting to the basement door. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew better. By the next morning, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had to know. I grabbed a hammer before heading downstairs, like that was going to help against whatever this was. My footsteps echoed as I reached the bottom. The mirror was right where I left it, but now the glass looked darker, like it was bruised. I stepped closer, raising the hammer. My reflection stared back at me, but this time it wasn't copying my movements. It blinked. The hammer slipped from my fingers and clattered to the floor. I should have run right then, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. My reflection leaned closer to the glass, pressing its palm flat against it, and then cracks started to spread across the surface. Not outward, inward. The glass rippled like water, and I saw it, a thing behind the reflection. It wasn't me, not anymore. Its eyes were too dark, its mouth too wide, and when it smiled, my whole body went cold. It lifted its hand again. Only this time I felt it. Cold fingers brushing against my cheek, even though it was still inside. I stumbled back, but the glass kept rippling, and then it pushed. Its hand came through. I ran. I didn't even think about it. I just ran. I slammed the basement door and locked it, but the tapping started again. Only this time it wasn't just tapping. It was scratching. The scratching didn't stop. It grew louder, sharper, like nails scraping against glass and wood. I sat against the basement door, my heart hammering, gripping the hammer I'd dropped earlier. But no matter how tightly I held it, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Then I heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the basement stairs. I couldn't breathe. The lock rattled, and for a moment, I thought it might hold. But then the door creaked, and the handle turned. I swung the hammer before it even opened. The wood splintered, but nothing was there, just emptiness. And then I saw it. Not in front of me, but reflected in the glass of the living room window. My reflection. No, not mine. The other one. It was smiling, but this time it wasn't trapped. It stood behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. Still, I felt its cold breath against my neck. I ran out the front door, down the street, barefoot and wild. I didn't stop until I reached my car, shaking as I locked the doors. But when I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw it sitting in the back seat, smiling. I don't remember driving. I don't remember how I ended up at the motel, or how long I sat there, staring at the mirror above the sink. I just know I couldn't look away. I thought maybe it was gone. Maybe I left it behind, in the house. But I should have known better. The mirror in the motel was smaller, simpler, but when I leaned closer, I saw it. Not at first. At first, it was just my reflection, but then its eyes darkened, and its lips curled into that same crooked smile. I smashed it. Glass rained down, shards cutting into my hands, but it didn't matter. It was still there in every reflective surface. The screen of my phone, the black of the TV when it was off, even in my eyes when I caught my reflection in the window. I don't know how to stop it. I don't even know if it can be stopped. All I know is that it's waiting, watching, and when I close my eyes, it gets closer. I always thought churches were safe. Maybe that's why I stopped when I saw it, an old, weathered chapel in the middle of nowhere. I was driving through some back roads in Pennsylvania, chasing photos for a travel blog no one read, when I spotted it. It shouldn't have been there. The road was empty for miles, nothing but trees and shadows stretching in every direction. But there it was, tucked between the trees, leaning slightly like it had grown tired of standing upright. The roof sagged and the steeple looked ready to collapse, but the front doors were wide open, as if it had been expecting someone. I don't know why I stopped. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the way the light seemed to dim the closer I got. Or maybe it was because I'd been driving for hours and needed to stretch my legs. The air changed the second I stepped inside. It felt heavier, like the space was too full, even though it was empty. Rows of pews stretched toward the altar, covered in dust and cobwebs. The smell of old wood and damp earth hung in the air. And then I heard the faint hum of an organ playing somewhere deeper inside. I should have left right then, but I didn't. The organ music echoed softly, drifting through the still air like it was alive. I told myself it had to be the wind, or maybe an old speaker malfunctioning. That's what I wanted to believe. But as I stepped farther inside, the sound grew louder, clearer, too deliberate to be random. I moved down the aisle, my footsteps muffled by the dust-covered carpet. The pews seemed smaller up close, like they'd been built for people who didn't need much room. Their wood was cracked and splintered, but I swear some of the seats still felt warm when I touched them. The organ played on. I spotted the door to the back room near the altar. It was slightly ajar, just enough to let the sound leak through. My stomach twisted, but my feet kept moving. The room was darker than it should have been. My flashlight barely cut through the shadows, and the organ sat at the far end, its keys moving on their own. I froze. No wires. No wires. No motors. The keys pressed and released like invisible fingers were playing them. I stepped closer, and the music stopped. Then I saw the candles. Rows of unlit candles lined the walls, but as I moved, they flickered to life one after the other, until the room glowed. And that's when I noticed the shadows. Not mine. They shifted along the walls, moving without a source, stretching and bending toward me. I turned to run, but the door slammed shut. The organ started again. The organ didn't stop this time. Its notes pounded through the room, heavier now, almost angry. My pulse raced as I threw myself at the door, rattling the handle. Locked. I turned, and the shadows crept closer. They stretched across the walls like ink bleeding through paper, their shapes twisting and shifting. Faces formed hollow-eyed and empty, but only for a moment before melting back into the dark. My breath came in sharp gasps. I told myself it wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the floorboards groaned as if something was moving beneath them. I backed away from the door and toward the organ, my flashlight trembling. The candles flickered, casting long, jagged shapes across the walls. My reflection danced in the polished surface of the organ, but even in the dim light, something was wrong. The reflection didn't match me. It sat straighter. Its hands hovered over the keys, and then it smiled. I stumbled back, and the organ groaned like it was alive. The keys slammed down all at once, a sound so sharp it made my ears ring. The reflection's eyes locked on mine, and then it stood up, not in the glass, behind me. I didn't look, I couldn't, but I felt it, felt the cold breath against the back of my neck. My legs finally worked, and I ran. I shoved the pews aside, knocking them over as I sprinted for the entrance. The door wasn't locked anymore. I burst through it, nearly falling down the steps, and into the night. But the music followed. It wasn't coming from the church anymore. It was coming from me. I could feel it vibrating in my chest, growing louder with every step I took. And somewhere behind me I heard the door creak open again. I didn't stop running until I reached the car. I threw myself inside, locked the doors, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The organ music didn't stop. It was louder now, vibrating through the car's frame like the engine was humming with it. My hands shook as I gripped the wheel, staring at the church through the windshield. The door was wide open. The candles inside flickered, casting twisted shadows that seemed to stretch toward me. Then I saw them. Figures stepping out of the church, faceless and hollow, their forms rippling like smoke. They moved slowly, deliberately, and I couldn't breathe. The organ keys slammed again, echoing through the night, and my rearview mirror tilted without me touching it. I froze. There was something in the back seat. I turned slowly, and there it was, the reflection from the organ's glass. Its eyes were hollow, its grin too wide. It leaned forward, tilting its head. "Stay," it whispered. I screamed and yanked the door handle, tumbling out onto the gravel. My flashlight smashed as it hit the ground, but I didn't care. I ran. The church bells started ringing, and behind me I heard the car door creak open. I don't remember how I got away. One moment I was running. The next, I was miles down the road, my feet bloody and my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I saw lights, street lights, houses, people. Safety, or so I thought. I checked into a motel, desperate to feel normal again. But the music, it followed me. At first, I thought it was in my head, just echoes of fear I couldn't shake. But it wasn't. It was real. Soft at first, like a hum in the walls, but then louder, closer. I covered the mirrors. It didn't help, because that's the thing, whatever came out of that church didn't need last to find me. It's in every shadow, every corner I can't quite see. I feel it watching, waiting. I haven't slept in days. The organ plays every night now, and when I close my eyes, I see them, those hollow shapes moving closer. I know what they want. They want me to come back, and I'm afraid that one night I will.